and it's about the various barriers that you hit when you're trying to promote the use of social media. I think if you're here, you've probably bought into the idea that interactivity is a good thing, that organisations can improve the quality of their thinking, can improve the quality of their networking, can improve the way that they communicate internally and externally, that they can get a lot of the benefits of open source thinking, and so on. But if you end up working with a public sector organisation in particular, but also I think the same is true to varying degrees with various private sector organisations, you start to hit upon little barriers, little reasons why they're not using this, and they can range from fears about branding or fears about reputation management, fears about privacy, about security, fears about network security, kind of technical barriers, if you like. And you also hit training problems. You hit the worry that that the staff aren't familiar enough with the tools to use them in a way that doesn't damage the reputation of the organisation. Or I think another one is that the fears of digital exclusion. That if you're an organisation that wants to this is particularly true with the public sector, is that if you have a responsibility to consult widely and involve people and provide information freely, there's a worry that a significant proportion of the population don't use the internet. And so what you'll end up doing, if you put any resources into this, you end up over-serving the sharp-elbowed, middle-class, young people that have access to a good PC and a good broadband connection and have a use of doing it, experience of doing this. The reason I'm talking to you today is because this is a barrier that I hit over many years. I had a project where we tried to encourage local authorities to get councillors to set up a small personal web page and use that web page just to explain who they are, what they did. In England and Wales there are 22,000 councillors. In Northern Ireland there are 528 to be precise. The aim is to get it down to about 425 if the local government reforms ever go through. But we found, certainly back in 2002 when I started this, we found that there were almost no local councillors that were using the internet. And that figure hasn't grown very significantly in the intervening years until Twitter. Twitter came along, and because there were so few barriers that you could put in the way of Twitter that all of a sudden councillors started using it. And I think a mighty 2% or something like that of councillors are now using Twitter. But certainly the idea that you elect people and that those people are responsible to you and can respond to you if you're using social media, that's not happening. So I worked with a colleague of mine, a friend of mine called Tim Davis, and a few other people, and we did a session at an event called Reboot Britain last year, where we worked towards, we used a wiki to do this initially. Tim, in fairness, I'm not going to take all the credit for it. I'm not going to take most of the credit for this. Tim did most of it. He set up a wiki that he worked with a lot of people who worked in the public sector and the voluntary sector. And what they did was he asked everyone to tell him all of the tiny little barriers that exist to using social media. And we convened on the wiki gradually, sort of, combining them and putting them together. We ended up nicely with 50 barriers, nice round figure. We found, for instance, that if you work in a local authority or a public sector organisation, that access to Web 2 related sites are blocked or filtered. So you can't get at YouTube, you can't get at Facebook. Portsmouth City Council banned its staff from using Facebook about 18 months ago, and their phone bill went through the roof. They found that essentially an average member of staff, the average member of staff was wasting an awful 7 minutes per month of public money time on Facebook. So they banned it, and of course the phone bill went through the roof, but those people became less networked. So the barriers are access to sites are blocked. That if you want to unblock a site, you have to fill out a form and you have to take it down to the IT department. The IT department have to process it. And when we did the wiki, we found that the average process, because the local authorities and public sector organisations have service level agreements, that the IT's department service level agreement is that they will respond to a request to unblock a site within 24 hours, which means they respond in 24 hours. And often they just send you back saying, an email back saying, we're not going to unblock the site that you requested because it's on such and such a list. There's also the thing that when you request the site to be unblocked, what they do is they unblock it and reblock it within 7 days. So their process is that you can request the site is unblocked for a period of time, and if you don't specify the period of time, they say what it is. That sites are only unblocked on your desk. So if you're using SlideShare, for instance, or you're using YouTube for something, you've loaded something up, and you go over to your colleague's desk and say, look, I've loaded this, can you have a look? They go and look at the site, they can't. So you can't actually use it to communicate within the building. And there are plenty more of these. There are, that, for instance, sites can only be accessed during lunch hours, so you can't actually use sites that are useful for work during the hours you're working. That ICT resources and abuses are seen as something that's the domain of the IT manager rather than the senior managers, and the senior managers are the ones who actually want their staff to use this stuff, but the IT managers don't. You know, many of you have come across the idea that in your network, your machine is imaged. So what happens is essentially your PC is just an image of one PC at the centre, and it's constantly overwritten. So if you install anything on your machine the following morning when you log on, it's uninstalled. For instance, that the people who procure your phones don't procure ones that allow you to use social media tools. So that they pick phones, they pick a phone to make a phone call, and that's it for staff. That they don't even tell staff what they can legitimately ask for in the first place, or that there's no policy on this. So those are the kind of technical barriers, the sort of big technical barriers that you meet at the policy level. At the next level is the one on the equipment, where, and you know, I've worked with plenty of local authorities where you go in even today and the browser is IE5 or IE6, and you can't use pretty well anything that's of any use to anybody if you're using IE5 or IE6. That staff can't change the browser homepage. So if they're using I don't know, Google, what's it called, the Google homepage, where you set up all your RSS feeds, you actually can't do that. So yeah, it's a massive productivity tool. Tim, who did this with me, he said that when he worked in the public sector briefly, and he just left. He said because what they did was they took every productivity tool I had off me, and it made me impossible to do what was on my job description. That you can't install browser plugins, so you can't install Delicious tags, or you can't install any one of the various Firefox plugins because you're not allowed to use Firefox in the first place. That if you go to a website and register for a service, and it asks you to fill in your email and send you the confirmation email, that the spam filters won't let that email through. So you actually can't register for a service. Other ones, there's no ability to play sound. So many public sector organisations, they procure, what they do is they draw a list of the things they want the computers to do, and then they don't play sound. So there are still machines that actually don't have a sound card. So essentially you can't use, even with headphones, you can't use YouTube or things like that. There's no way to get a photo. So, you know, the personal photo is an important part of sort of building your profile on social media things, but actually you're not allowed to put a USB stick in the machine, you're not allowed to do all these things. There's no Wi-Fi in meeting rooms. All of these are barriers, and this sounds like a long moaning list, and it's going to get longer, but there is an end point to this. The third one is skills. That staff simply don't know that you can use tabbed browsers, often because the browser they have doesn't allow for tabbing if they're using IE, or older versions of IE. That they don't know how to use search tools. So there's no sort of training for the kind of stuff that you and I perhaps do in the evening when we're not at work, just recreationally using PCs. But older members of staff aren't aware of these things, that they can't download and edit images, that they can't install new utility software. The staff actually don't know how to do this.